I've always believed the most dangerous people in business aren't the loud ones. It's those who assume they're the smartest in the room without ever checking who's actually there. My name is Linda, and I've worked at Collern for 8 years, surviving 2 restructurings, 3 failed product launches, and a global crisis. I'm not flashy. I don't throw around titles, but I know this company better than anyone else on the 12th floor. What most didn't know, including my new boss, was that I was also the silent investor who kept the company afloat during its darkest year, using my grandmother's inheritance to quietly become the majority shareholder. No spotlight, no ego. And then he arrived. Jacob Moore, newly appointed executive director of operations, polished, Stanford MBA, all charm and spreadsheets, introducing himself like a motivational speaker with a grin almost too perfect, declaring, "Change is coming. We're going to take this company to the next level." At first, I gave him the benefit of the doubt, but it quickly became clear he wasn't here to lead. He was here to dominate, cutting first the admin team, then product development, treating decade-long employees as misaligned, and in every meeting casting himself as the hero, loving the sound of his own voice so much I started counting how many times he said, "Let me simplify this for you." By week 3, he hadn't asked me a single question about my role, though I had built the analytics division from scratch, developed tools saving over $2 million, and led the company's most successful client migration. One Thursday morning, his assistant summoned me to conference room B with no explanation. I walked the marble corridor, heels clicking in the heavy silence, and found him seated at the head of the table, blinds drawn, complaining. "The light's too bright, Linda. Let's keep this short." He finally looked up. "I've been reviewing your department's output. Frankly, I'm not impressed. The tools are outdated. Your team lacks initiative. You've plateaued. You're replaceable. You add nothing here." The words didn't sting. Instead, something inside me cracked like a dam long held back. I laughed sharply. He frowned. "I'm serious." "I know," I said, smiling. "And that's what makes it funny." He leaned back, irritated. "If this amuses you, maybe you'd prefer to leave. We can formalize it today." I met his gaze. "Then fire me." His expression faltered. "Excuse me?" I leaned forward. "Fire me. If I'm useless, let's not waste time. Get HR and walk me out." Silence filled the room. He hadn't expected defiance. Not from me. He thought I'd beg, just like the others. But I had something he didn't know, and how fun the next boardroom meeting would be, because he had no idea who actually held the power in this company. No clue whose signature was needed to approve his next promotion or quietly remove him. That day, as I walked out of the conference room with a polite nod, I wasn't furious. I was ready. Ready for the curtain to lift and to finally show Jacob Moore exactly who he had just tried to erase. By Friday, word had started to spread. Not publicly, of course, but in offices like this, whispers move faster than emails. People noticed how I left the conference room, calm, composed, not a trace of worry. That's the thing about silence. It unnerves the loudest people the most. Jacob spent the morning in back-to-back meetings, striding through the halls like a man surveying his new kingdom, avoiding eye contact with anyone outside his hand-picked circle of junior executives. But I knew what he was doing, paving the way for something bigger. He had plans, ambitions, and in his mind, I was a loose end, someone to tie off before the board's quarterly strategy session. Too bad he hadn't done his homework. That morning, I got a call from Michelle Coburn's head of legal, someone I'd trusted for years. "Linda," she said, "I reviewed the latest board prep file. Jacob submitted a proposed restructure plan. Your name's not in it." I raised an eyebrow. "He's trying to erase a whole division, or edge you out entirely. But here's the part he really messed up. He listed majority shareholder approval as pending." I smiled. Of course he did. He doesn't know it's you, does he? Number, and I have no plans to tell him. There was a pause on the other end. Linda, you could stop this today. I don't want to stop it, I replied. I want him to walk right into it, because men like Jacob don't learn through words. They learn through consequences. And his is coming. I spent the afternoon preparing my notes for the Monday board meeting, reviewing financials, operational risks, department performance, then pulling up my ownership documents, quietly reminding myself of the leverage I carried in a leather folder no one had ever seen. When I closed my laptop that evening, the tension settled in my chest like a loaded spring. Monday would be interesting, but not for the reasons Jacob thought. The day arrived with sharp winter sunlight that made everything feel a little too clear. I dressed intentionally, tailored navy blazer, crisp white blouse, hair tied back, the look of someone you don't overlook twice. The boardroom was already half full when I arrived. Michelle caught my eye and gave a small nod. I took my usual seat near the far end of the table. Jacob walked in 10 minutes later, confidence radiating off him like heat, took the seat to the right of the chairman, cleared his throat, and opened his presentation. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin with a vision. A leaner, more aggressive Coburn tech, one that thrives by cutting outdated practices and redefining leadership. His eyes scanned the room as he clicked through slides, charts, buzzwords, projections, all designed to impress. Then came the final section. In order to accelerate innovation, I propose a structural change to the analytics division. We'll transition Linda Geller's role to an external advisory position, with her duties redistributed to more agile junior staff. He said it without even glancing my way. A few board members shifted in their seats. Michelle stared at him, stone-faced. Then the chairman spoke. Before we proceed, we need shareholder approval for any structural changes at that level. Jacob nodded. I've listed it as pending. I was under the impression it wouldn't be a problem. It was time. I cleared my throat calmly, clearly. I'm afraid I can't approve that. Jacob blinked. I'm sorry? I said no. He turned toward me, confused. With all due respect, Linda, you don't have the authority. I do, I said, reaching into my folder. I placed a copy of the ownership structure on the table and slid it toward the chairman. Michelle leaned forward and confirmed it. She does. Linda is the majority shareholder through Geller Holdings. It's been verified since the last capital raise. The silence was thunderous. Jacob stared at me, lips parting, then closing again. For the first time since he arrived, he looked uncertain. I didn't know. I tilted my head. That's exactly the problem, Jacob. You've been making sweeping decisions without understanding who you're dealing with or what they've done for this company. The chairman leaned back in his chair. Well, that certainly changes things. Jacob's face flushed. Why didn't anyone tell me? I didn't flinch. Because you didn't ask. You assumed. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Just silence, heavy and defeated. The chairman spoke again, addressing the room. We'll take a short recess. Linda, if you'd stay back for a moment. As the others filed out, Jacob remained frozen in his seat. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. His silence said enough, because that morning, Jacob Moore finally realized the boardroom wasn't his kingdom. It was mine. And I was just getting started. After the room cleared, the silence felt different. Not uncertainty, but the kind that follows a shift in gravity, the kind people feel before they understand it. I stayed seated while the chairman reviewed the documents I'd given him. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That was enough. So, this explains why you were so composed? He said quietly. I gave a small nod. I've spent a long time choosing when to speak. He folded his hands, thoughtful. You didn't have to stay quiet, Linda. You could have pulled rank at any time. I didn't want rank, I said. I wanted results. I wanted to see who showed up with integrity and who tried to bulldoze the people who built this place. He nodded slowly, then leaned back. I'll be honest. That was one hell of a power move. I wasn't aiming for drama, I replied. Just clarity. Outside the room, murmurs returned. Footsteps, chairs shifting. The others would be back soon. But Jacob hadn't moved. He was still seated, staring at the screen like it might offer a lifeline. He hadn't said a word since the truth came out, and I hadn't looked at him once. When I stood, I gathered my folder, slid my pen into my notebook, and walked past his chair without hesitation. Just as I reached the door, I heard it. Why didn't you just tell me? His voice was quiet, flat, almost like a child realizing the game was real. I turned slightly, not enough to face him, because the people who matter already know, and the ones who don't eventually show you why they don't. Then I left. The rest of the day moved like molasses. Emails piled up. Meetings were postponed. No one quite knew what to say, so most said nothing at all. But the atmosphere had shifted. People passed me in the hallway with subtle nods, unsure how to acknowledge what had happened. Some looked curious, some relieved, others uneasy. I wasn't surprised. Jacob didn't appear at the afternoon executive huddle. His assistant said he was handling urgent matters. I didn't need a memo to understand what that meant. He was scrambling, trying to understand how he'd missed something so critical, trying to pull himself free before the ground gave way completely. But the cracks were already showing. That evening, as I was getting ready to leave, I received an anonymous message through our internal employee portal. Thank you. You don't know me, but I've watched him steamroll half my team these past few weeks. It means a lot to see someone finally stop him. There was no name, no department attached, just a quiet note of gratitude from someone who had clearly been holding their breath for too long. It was the first of many. By Tuesday, 5 more messages arrived, then 12. Some were brief, others long and detailed, filled with timelines of sudden dismissals, strange evaluations, and veiled threats. I compiled everything into a private file, not for revenge, but for proof, because I knew Jacob. Men like him don't fold after one bad hand. They look for a new deck, a new angle. And if he couldn't push me out directly, he'd try to weaken me indirectly through whispers, metrics, and division. Sure enough, it began with a memo titled Re-Evaluation of Departmental Efficiency, sent from Jacob's office late Wednesday and flagged for immediate review. It requested access to performance data across the analytics and finance divisions. Subtle, strategic, framed like oversight, aimed like a weapon. I smiled. He was predictable, and that made him easy to counter. I picked up the phone and called Michelle. I think it's time we take this up a notch, I said. You want to initiate an internal audit? She asked. Not yet. I want to meet with HR and compliance off the record. I'm not accusing anyone of misconduct, but I want a record of everything that's happened since Jacob arrived. There was a pause. Then, understood. That night, I stayed late again, not because I had to, but because I needed to think. I walked the empty halls, fluorescent lights humming above me, the city skyline glowing faintly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 8 years. 8 years of building, supporting, fixing things quietly. And now, finally, someone had tried to erase me, only to discover I own the pen. But this wasn't over. I could feel it. Jacob wasn't done. He was licking his wounds, waiting, planning his next move. And whatever it was, I'd be ready. By the following Monday, Jacob was back in the office, walking with that same overconfident stride, nodding to people like nothing had happened, like the board meeting hadn't exposed the single biggest oversight of his career. That was Jacob's problem. His ego was both his armor and his blindfold, and now it was starting to crack. Instead of challenging me directly, he changed tactics. That week, I noticed the subtle shifts. First came the data permissions. My team suddenly lost access to two core reporting dashboards we'd used for years. IT said the change came from an executive directive. Streamlining workflows, they called it. No one would say whose directive it was, but I didn't need to ask. Then came the client meeting shuffle. My presentation with our largest analytics partner was reassigned, and I only found out when my calendar sent a cancellation alert 15 minutes before the meeting. When I followed up, Jacob's assistant said it had been rerouted to better align with operational leadership. I could feel it happening. He wasn't coming for my job anymore. He was coming for my credibility. Slow, deliberate, quiet sabotage. He wanted my influence to erode inch by inch, not through confrontation, but through control. He was betting I'd get tired, paranoid, lash out, or give up. But I'd seen this tactic before. Years ago, fresh out of business school, I'd worked under a manager who had done the exact same thing to a woman on our leadership team: whisper campaigns, strategic exclusion, private criticisms disguised as concerns. She eventually left, exhausted and isolated. I hadn't had the voice to speak up then, but I do now. That Wednesday, I asked Michelle to lunch. We met at a quiet off-campus cafe, small leather booths, dim lighting. I laid out the pattern: access blocks, reassignments, the tone of Jacob's new memos. "He's isolating you," she said after a long sip of her coffee. "Yes," I said, "and I want to respond the right way. Not react. Respond." Michelle nodded. "Start documenting everything," she said. "Not just incidents, but emails, meeting logs, timestamps. If he's creating a hostile environment, we need evidence." "I already have a file," I said, "and I've started receiving quiet messages from others he's sidelined, people afraid to speak." She leaned in. "How far are you willing to take this?" I didn't answer immediately. Then, as far as I have to. I won't be pushed out of the company I helped save, not by a man with a shiny resume and a superiority complex. Over the next few days, I became meticulous. I logged every delay, every denial of access, every meeting I was removed from. Screenshots, call summaries, even voice memos from certain discussions. My inbox became a journal, my calendar a map of microaggressions. Then something unexpected happened. I received a forwarded email Jacob had sent to the chairman, CCing 2 board members. It had been accidentally sent to me by one of the recipients. A quiet ally, I suspected. The message was short, clinical. "Linda has shown signs of disengagement. I'm concerned about her leadership viability long term. She's missed several meetings and seems increasingly uncooperative." I stared at the screen. Disengaged, uncooperative. Words not describing, but erasing. This was it. His next move. He wasn't just sabotaging workflow, he was shaping a narrative where I was the problem, where he could justify my removal with plausible deniability. I took a deep breath and flagged the email. This time, I wouldn't stay quiet. The next morning, I called for a closed-door meeting with the chairman and Michelle. I presented my file calmly, cleanly, without emotion, just facts, dates, patterns, evidence. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Michelle spoke. "This is coordinated, calculated, and it's not just you. Company resources are being manipulated to undermine a senior executive." The chairman folded his hands. "You've handled this with impressive restraint, Linda." I met his eyes. "I didn't come to burn bridges, but I won't let someone slowly torch my reputation to protect their ego." He nodded. Leave it with us. There's a board ethics committee meeting next week. Jacob will be invited to present his leadership case. Will I be allowed to attend? You won't just attend, he said. You'll speak. As I left the room, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Certainty. Jacob had underestimated me once. That had been his first mistake. Now he was trying to rewrite the story, and next week, I'd make sure the board knew the truth. In my words, because I wasn't just a shareholder or a department head, I was the warning he never saw coming. The board ethics meeting was set for Tuesday at 9 a.m. I arrived 10 minutes early, not nervous, but to show I wasn't hiding. The executive conference room was unusually still. No chatter, no jokes, just silence broken by the quiet clicking of laptops and occasional sips of coffee. Michelle met me outside the glass door. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I nodded once. I've been ready since the day he tried to erase me. Inside, the board members were already seated. The chairman, the CFO, 2 senior advisors, and the company's external HR counsel. At the head of the table sat an empty chair for Jacob. He arrived at exactly 8:59, still polished, still smug. But this time, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning," he said, voice smooth. "Appreciate everyone being here." The chairman nodded. "Jacob, you've been invited to respond to several internal concerns raised about your leadership conduct over the past 6 weeks. You'll have time to present your perspective. Then we'll hear from Linda." Jacob shot me a tight glance, as if this were just another performance to get through. He opened his folder, cleared his throat, and began. He said he believed they were dealing with a simple matter of operational misalignment, that he'd been brought in to optimize performance, and that unfortunately, some individuals had taken strategic decisions personally, particularly those involving role realignment and departmental efficiency. He spoke like a textbook, cold, rehearsed. "Linda Geller has been an asset to this company," he continued, "but over the past month her behavior has changed. She's withdrawn from key projects, resisted collaborative input, and frankly created an atmosphere of tension that's been reported by several colleagues." He paused, letting the words settle, a subtle smear wrapped in professionalism. Then he added that while he regretted their strained relationship, this was less about misconduct and more about a clash of working styles, and that he'd like to move past it and focus on solutions. When he finished, the room was still. He leaned back slightly, satisfied. Then it was my turn. I didn't stand or raise my voice. I simply opened my folder. I said I'd like to clarify a few things and looked at each board member in turn. The decisions Jacob referred to weren't strategic. They were targeted. I'd documented 6 separate instances where I was intentionally removed from meetings, stripped of data access, and reassigned from client communications without cause. I handed printed timelines to everyone at the table as Michelle nodded. "These weren't performance-based decisions," I said. "They were deliberate moves to isolate me and push me out." After I revealed I was the majority shareholder, the tone changed. Subtly at first, then systematically. I paused, then said I wasn't the only one. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a second folder filled with anonymous reports from employees across multiple departments, each describing the same tactics: gaslighting, exclusion, demeaning evaluations with no basis. The same pattern appeared in every account. Abrupt restructuring, no transparency, no support, just quiet pressure to leave. The chairman flipped through the pages, his jaw tight. I added that I'd also received a copy of an email Jacob sent to the board claiming I'd disengaged from my duties, an email based on meetings I'd been removed from without my knowledge. He'd created the absence, then used it as evidence. I let the silence settle. Jacob's composure cracked. He said they were one-sided accounts and that anonymous complaints couldn't be treated as fact. Michelle spoke calmly then, saying several of the incidents Linda documented had been corroborated. IT had confirmed the access removals came directly from Jacob's office, and HR had flagged similar concerns that were never followed up. The chairman folded his hands and said Jacob's role was to lead with integrity, but instead he'd created an environment of manipulation and fear, misused his authority, and now the board had to decide what that meant for his future. Jacob looked at me, his voice rising for the first time, accusing everyone of letting me trap him. "No," I said evenly. "You trapped yourself. You underestimated the one person who wouldn't stay quiet." After a brief pause, the chairman stood and announced Jacob was suspended effective immediately pending further review, that security would escort him out, and a formal statement would go to the executive team by the end of the day. Jacob stood frozen, his smug confidence collapsing into disbelief. "I built this," he started. "No," I said softly. "You nearly destroyed it." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him as the room collectively exhaled. The chairman looked at me and said I hadn't just protected myself, I'd protected the company. I nodded but didn't smile, because I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 2 weeks after Jacob was escorted out, the atmosphere at Colburn Tech had shifted. Not with celebration or announcements, but in quieter ways. The silence no longer felt heavy with suspicion. It felt open. People made eye contact again. Laughter returned to the break rooms. Meetings felt like collaboration again, not battles of posturing and control. Still, Jacob's shadow lingered. Rumors circulated that he'd tried to negotiate a quiet exit with a severance package, but the board declined. The formal report cited abuse of authority, ethical violations, and an attempt to deliberately mislead executive leadership. He left without fanfare. No official statement, no LinkedIn update, no goodbye drinks. He just vanished. I didn't step into the spotlight immediately. Instead, I went back to work. But this time, things were different. The board asked me to stay on as interim head of strategic operations. I accepted, but on one condition. "I want to rebuild trust," I told the chairman. "Not just mine, everyone's." He agreed. "We need that now more than ever." I started small, met with every department head personally, reopened channels Jacob had shut down, reinstated access to teams who'd been cut out of their own workflows, invited anonymous feedback, asked questions, and most importantly, listened. The messages kept coming from people I'd never spoken to before. One junior analyst wrote, "When I saw you speak in that meeting, I realized I didn't have to be afraid to speak up anymore. Thank you for showing me that strength doesn't always mean yelling." Another said simply, "You made me believe we could be led by someone who actually sees us." Those words stayed with me because that's what it had come down to in the end, being seen. A month after Jacob's removal, the board gathered again, not for discipline, but for decision. The chairman called me into his office ahead of the meeting. I assumed it was about a new appointment, maybe even helping choose Jacob's permanent replacement. Instead, he slid an envelope across his desk. My name printed in gold on the front. I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal letter, stamped and signed, Permanent Executive Director of Strategic Operations. I looked up. "I didn't ask for this," I whispered. "I know," he replied, "and that's why you're the right choice." There was no triumphant music, no applause, just stillness. I nodded once. "If I take this, I want a seat at every strategic table, not just for optics, but to drive change." "You have it," he said. "And I want a new code of leadership conduct, non-negotiable. Every new hire, every promotion, we start from values." Done. And the people Jacob tried to bury, I want their voices amplified. No more silencing talent because it's inconvenient. "You're shaping the culture now," he said. We're just following your lead. That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone went home. I stood by the window, staring at the city lights flickering like stars trying to stay lit in fog. I thought about my first day here 8 years ago, sitting quietly at my desk, terrified to speak too loudly, afraid to make mistakes. I'd watched others rise by noise and proximity while I kept my head down, working, waiting. I used to wonder if anyone ever noticed. Now I know they did. Eventually. The next morning, I removed Jacob's old nameplate from the glass wall of his former office. I didn't replace it with mine. Instead, I had a new one made. Integrity is not optional. 3 words. But everyone understood their meaning. Leadership isn't about control. It's about clarity, respect, and responsibility. And the people you lead will never forget how you made them feel. I know now that power doesn't always look like shouting in meetings or pounding fists on tables. Sometimes it looks like a woman quietly sitting through an ambush, then walking out stronger. Sometimes it's knowing when to speak, and sometimes it's knowing when to let silence speak for you. I didn't win because I had the title. I won because I never lost sight of who I was, even when others tried to rewrite the story. And that's a kind of power no one can take away.